Mara Thompson's coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she barely noticed as she stared at the contract spread across her kitchen table, the words blurring together under the harsh overhead light. The boutique marketing firm she'd poured 5 years of her life into was hemorrhaging clients faster than she could replace them, and the bank had made it crystal clear that another missed payment would mean foreclosure on the small commercial space she leased downtown. She was 30 days from losing everything, and the panic that had become her constant companion tightened around her chest like a vice. Her phone buzzed with another email from a creditor, and she let her head drop into her hands, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in her body. The knock at her door came so unexpectedly that she actually jumped, her elbow catching the edge of her mug and sending lukewarm coffee spreading across the financial statements she'd been reviewing. She swore under her breath, grabbing a kitchen towel to blot the mess, and seriously considered ignoring whoever was standing in her hallway at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. But the knock came again, more insistent this time, and with a resigned sigh she crossed her small apartment and yanked open the door. The man standing in her doorway looked like he'd walked out of a magazine spread for expensive watches or luxury cars. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his dark hair slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it, and his green eyes held an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether he belonged somewhere. Mara Thompson. His voice was deep, smooth, with just a hint of roughness around the edges. Who's asking? She tightened her grip on the doorframe, suddenly very aware that she was wearing 3-day-old yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt with a coffee stain on the front. My name is Preston Gallagher. I own Gallagher Industries. I need to hire you, and I need you to start tomorrow. She blinked at him, trying to process the words. Gallagher Industries was one of the largest privately held manufacturing companies in the state, with their hands in everything from automotive parts to aerospace components. She'd read about Preston Gallagher in business journals, seen his face in newspaper articles about his meteoric rise in an industry dominated by legacy corporations and old money. He was 32, ruthlessly intelligent, and worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $400 million. I don't understand, she said slowly. How did you even find my address? I make it my business to know things. He shifted his weight, and she caught a glimpse of expensive leather shoes beneath the perfectly tailored hem of his trousers. Your firm handled the product launch for Morrison Tech last year. The campaign was brilliant, creative, and you tripled their market penetration in 6 months. I need that kind of thinking. That was a team effort. The automatic deflection came easily, born from years of trying to share credit and build up her small staff. You were the lead strategist. I've seen the internal documents. He said it matter-of-factly, without any hint of apology for what was clearly corporate espionage of some kind. I have a situation that requires immediate attention, and everyone else I've approached either doesn't have the vision or doesn't have the time. You have both. I don't have time. I have a business to run. A business that's about to go under. He said it gently, but the words still hit like a physical blow. I'm not trying to be cruel, Miss Thompson. I'm trying to offer you a solution. Work for me for 6 months. Full-time, exclusive contract. I'll pay you $400,000, plus cover all your current business debts and lease obligations. The number hung in the air between them, so absurd that she almost laughed. $400,000. It was more money than she'd made in the last 3 years combined. It would save her business, pay off her creditors, give her enough breathing room to rebuild properly instead of constantly scrambling to keep her head above water. "This will end badly," she heard herself say, the words coming from some deep instinct that recognized danger when it appeared at her door in a $1,000 suit. Preston Gallagher's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then let's make the journey worth it." She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to close the door, to find another way, to not tie herself to a man who looked at her like he could see straight through every defense she'd ever built. But rational thinking didn't pay the bills, and pride couldn't keep her employees from losing their jobs when her company finally collapsed. "What's the situation?" she asked, and just like that, she watched something shift in his expression, a flash of triumph quickly masked. "Not here. Come with me now, and I'll explain everything. You'll have all the details before you sign anything, and if you decide to walk away, I'll compensate you for your time tonight." "You want me to get in a car with a stranger at 9:30 at night based on a vague job offer and a promise of information later?" She raised an eyebrow. "Do I look that desperate? You look like someone smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself." He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and held it out. "Call this number. It's my head of security. He'll verify my identity, my company, and anything else you need to know. I'll wait." Mara took the card, retreated into her apartment, and spent the next 10 minutes on her phone. The security director sounded exactly like what she'd expect from someone in that position: professional, slightly suspicious of her questions, but ultimately forthcoming with information. He confirmed Preston's identity, provided references from 3 major corporations Gallagher Industries had worked with, and gave her the direct number for Preston's attorney if she wanted legal verification of anything. When she hung up, she looked at the coffee-stained financial statements still spread across her table, at the stack of past due notices she'd shoved into a drawer that morning, at the carefully maintained planner where she'd been crossing off potential strategies like items on a grocery list, each one failing to materialize into actual salvation. She changed into jeans and a clean sweater, grabbed her jacket and purse, and opened the door to find Preston exactly where she'd left him, leaning against the hallway wall with his phone in his hand. He looked up when she emerged, and she caught something in his expression that might have been relief. "I'm listening," she said, "but I'm not promising anything." "Fair enough." His car was parked illegally in front of her building, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses. He opened the passenger door for her with an old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his modern edge, and she slid into leather seats that felt like butter. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and coffee, and there was a laptop bag on the backseat along with what looked like architectural blueprints rolled up and secured with a rubber band. Preston drove with the same confidence he seemed to approach everything else, navigating the late-night traffic with easy competence. They didn't speak for the first few minutes, and Mara used the silence to study him in profile: the strong line of his jaw, the slight tension around his eyes that suggested he was running on too little sleep, the way his hands rested on the steering wheel with casual control. "My company is about to launch a new product line," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "Revolutionary manufacturing process that will reduce production costs by 40% while improving quality. We've spent 3 years developing it, invested tens of millions in research and equipment upgrades. Congratulations." She kept her tone neutral, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "6 weeks ago, I discovered that my VP of marketing has been leaking information to our primary competitor. Product specs, launch timeline, marketing strategy, everything. I fired him immediately, but the damage is done. They're planning to beat us to market with a knockoff version, and they're going to use our own marketing playbook to do it. Can't you sue them? Already in process, but litigation takes time, and by the time we get a judgment, the market opportunity will be gone. He turned onto a highway on ramp, accelerating smoothly into the flow of traffic. I need a completely new marketing strategy, something so different from what was leaked that it makes their stolen information worthless. And I need it implemented in 6 months, because that's when we're launching whether I'm ready or not. The board won't wait any longer. Mara processed this, her mind already working through the logistics. 6 months is an incredibly tight timeline for a full campaign development and rollout. I know. You need to give me complete access to your product development team, your financial projections, your distribution networks. I'd need authority to make decisions without running everything through 17 layers of corporate approval. You'd have it. And you'd need to accept that I might fail, that even with unlimited resources and total cooperation, 6 months might not be enough. I'm aware of the risks. He glanced at her, and in the dim light from the dashboard, his eyes were almost black. But I've built my entire company on calculated risks, Miss Thompson. This is just another one. They pulled off the highway onto a series of increasingly rural roads, eventually turning through a security gate that required Preston to enter a code and submit to a retinal scan. The driveway beyond was long and winding, cutting through carefully maintained grounds that were lit by subtle landscape lighting. When they finally reached the house, Mara had to suppress a gasp. It wasn't a house. It was an architectural masterpiece of glass and steel and warm wood, sprawling across the top of a hill with views that probably stretched for miles in the daylight. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see an interior that looked like something from a design magazine, all clean lines and understated luxury. You live here? The question came out before she could stop it, when I'm not sleeping on the couch in my office. He parked in front of a garage that looked big enough to hold 6 cars. Come on. I'll show you what you'd be working with. Inside, the house was even more impressive. The ceilings soared above them, and the open floor plan created a sense of endless space. But Preston led her past all of it, down a hallway to what was clearly a home office. He flipped on the lights to reveal a room that was part library, part war room, with one entire wall covered in whiteboards filled with notes and diagrams. Another wall dedicated to screens that currently showed what looked like security camera feeds from various locations, and a massive desk covered in papers and prototypes. Preston started pulling files from a locked cabinet, spreading them across a conference table that occupied one corner of the room. This is the product. These are the market projections. This is what we know about the competitor's timeline. And this, he placed a final folder in front of her, is the marketing strategy that was stolen. Mara sat down and started reading. What she found was actually impressive work, the kind of comprehensive campaign that would have cost $250,000 to develop. It was also now completely useless, worse than useless actually, because the competitor would see it coming from a mile away. You need to approach this from a completely different angle, she said, already seeing the possibilities. Instead of fighting them head-to-head, you need to reframe the entire conversation. Make this about something bigger than just cost savings. What do you mean? She stood, moving to one of his whiteboards and picking up a marker. Your competitor is going to sell on price and efficiency. Those are powerful motivators, especially in manufacturing. But you know what's more powerful? Purpose, identity, the story of what a company stands for. She started sketching out ideas, her exhaustion forgotten as her mind kicked into high gear. You've been in business for what, 15 years? 17. 17 years of American manufacturing jobs. 17 years of innovation. You're not just selling a new process, you're selling a vision of what American industry can be. You're the underdog standing up to corporate consolidation and overseas outsourcing. You're the employer who stayed loyal to your workforce even when it would have been cheaper to move production overseas. We've never marketed on patriotism before. I'm not talking about wrapping yourself in a flag and calling it a day. I'm talking about authentic storytelling. The competitor can copy your product, but they can't copy your history or your values. Have you ever laid off workers? No. I've reduced hours during slow periods and offered early retirement packages, but no mass layoffs. Then that's your story. You're the manufacturing company that treats employees like people, not line items on a balance sheet. That invests in American innovation. That's willing to spend 3 years and tens of millions developing a revolutionary process instead of taking shortcuts. You make them the villains trying to steal and profit from someone else's hard work, and you position yourself as the real deal they're trying to imitate. Preston was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, his arms crossed over his chest. You came up with that in 10 minutes. I came up with the framework. The execution would take months. She set down the marker. But yeah, this is what I do, or what I used to do before I was spending all my time trying to keep the lights on. So you'll take the job. She turned to face him fully. $400,000 for 6 months. All my current business debts and lease obligations covered. And I want it in writing that if this campaign fails, it doesn't impact my reputation. No blaming the consultant when things go wrong. Done. Anything else? I need to know that you'll actually listen to me. That you won't hire me and then ignore my advice because you think you know better. I've had those clients and it's a waste of everyone's time. Preston moved closer, and she was suddenly very aware of how tall he was, how the room seemed smaller with him in it. Miss Thompson, I didn't show up at your apartment at night and offer you $500,000 because I want someone to tell me what I want to hear. I need someone who will tell me the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Can you do that? She met his eyes, refusing to be intimidated. Yes. Then we have a deal. He held out his hand. She shook it, his grip firm and warm, and felt the trajectory of her entire life shift in that moment. For better or worse, she just tied herself to Preston Gallagher and whatever chaos that would bring. The contracts were drawn up and signed by the end of the week. Preston's lawyers were terrifyingly efficient, producing a document that covered every contingency Mara could think of, and several she hadn't. The payment structure was front-loaded, with $100,000 deposited into her account immediately, and the rest distributed monthly. The day after she signed, she received a second transfer that covered every outstanding debt her business had accumulated, along with 6 months of lease payments. Her first day at Gallagher Industries started at 7 in the morning on a Monday. Preston met her in the lobby himself, which seemed unusual for a CEO of a company this size, and gave her a brief tour of the facility. The manufacturing floor was massive, filled with equipment she didn't understand and workers who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Everyone they passed greeted Preston by name, and he returned the greetings with an ease that suggested he actually knew these people, wasn't just performing for her benefit. "How many employees do you have?" she asked as they climbed a set of stairs to the executive offices. 347, as of this morning. We just hired 2 new engineers. Her office was down the hall from Preston's, a space with large windows overlooking the manufacturing floor and enough room for the kind of sprawling creative process her work required. Someone had already set up a computer, a phone system, and a whiteboard that covered one entire wall. There was a coffee maker on a side table with a note that read, "Welcome aboard. Coffee is important. Preston." She found herself smiling at the note despite herself, and then quickly schooled her expression when Preston appeared in the doorway. "I'm meeting with the product development team at 8, he said. "I want you there. After that, I've scheduled one-on-one meetings with department heads so you can get a sense of the company culture and operations. This afternoon, we'll go over the budget and timeline in detail." "When do you sleep?" The question clearly surprised him. "When I have time." "That's not sustainable." "Neither is letting my company get destroyed by corporate espionage, but here we are." There was no heat in the words, just a statement of fact. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine." He wasn't fine. She could see it in the tension he carried, the way his jaw was tight even when he smiled, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many late nights. But she also recognized the stubborn pride of someone who'd built something from nothing and refused to show weakness, even to himself. The meeting with the product development team was both enlightening and overwhelming. The manufacturing process Preston had developed was genuinely revolutionary, the kind of innovation that would reshape industry standards. The team spoke with the kind of passionate enthusiasm that couldn't be faked, and it became clear within minutes that they believed in what they were building. Over the next 2 weeks, Mara threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She interviewed employees, toured every department, reviewed years of company records, and slowly pieced together the story she needed to tell. Preston was involved in every step, often working beside her until late into the night, challenging her assumptions and pushing for deeper insights. They developed an easy rhythm, a kind of professional shorthand where she could sketch out half an idea, and he'd immediately see where she was going. He was brilliant in a way that had nothing to do with formal education, and everything to do with an intuitive understanding of systems and people. And he listened, actually listened, in a way that made her feel heard. But he was also maddeningly closed off about anything personal. She learned about his company, his vision, his business philosophy, but nothing about where he came from or what drove him beyond the obvious success. He deflected personal questions with practiced ease, always steering the conversation back to work. It was during a late-night session 3 weeks into her contract that things finally shifted. They were in his office, surrounded by takeout containers and empty coffee cups, arguing about messaging strategy. Mara wanted to emphasize the employee loyalty angle more heavily. Preston thought it would come across as manipulative. "It's not manipulative if it's true," she said, frustration making her voice sharp. "You're the one who told me you've never done mass layoffs. Why won't you let me talk about it?" "Because I don't want to build a campaign on the backs of people's livelihoods." He stood, pacing to the window. "These are real people with real families. They're not props for a marketing story. I'm not suggesting we use them as props. I'm suggesting we tell the truth about who you are as an employer." "Why does that bother you so much?" He was quiet for a long moment, his back to her, shoulders tense. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "My father worked for a manufacturing company for 30 years. He was loyal, did everything they asked, won awards for perfect attendance and efficiency. When I was 16, they laid off his entire division and moved production to Mexico. He was 52 years old, and no one would hire him because he was too expensive and too old. We lost our house. My mother had to take a second job. I watched him break under the weight of being disposable." Mara felt something shift in her chest, a sudden understanding of the man behind the CEO mask. "Is that why you started this company?" "Part of it. I wanted to prove it was possible to be profitable and loyal, to treat people like they matter." He turned to face her, and in the dim office light he looked younger, more vulnerable. "But I also know that loyalty can be a weapon, that companies will talk about family and values right up until the moment they decide you're expendable. I don't want to be that person. You're not." She said it with complete certainty. "Preston, I've spent 3 weeks studying this company. I've talked to your employees. They don't just work for you, they believe in you. That's not manipulation, that's leadership, and it's a story worth telling." He held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. "Okay, we'll do it your way." "Our way," she corrected. "This is a partnership." His expression softened. "Yeah, it is." That night marked a turning point. Preston started opening up more, sharing stories about building the company, about the risks he'd taken and the failures he'd survived. Mara found herself reciprocating, talking about her own journey from a small-town girl with big dreams to a struggling entrepreneur trying to save her dying business. They started having lunch together, not just working meals but actual breaks where they talked about books and movies and the ridiculous things they'd seen on the manufacturing floor. The marketing campaign came together beautifully. Mara developed a multimedia strategy that told the story of American innovation and resilience, with Preston and his employees at the center. They produced a documentary-style video series showing the 3-year development process, the failures and breakthroughs, the people who'd believed in the vision even when it seemed impossible. They launched a social media presence that was refreshingly honest, showing both successes and the messy reality of manufacturing. Preston's competitor tried to counter with their stolen strategy, but it fell flat against the authenticity of what Mara had built. The business press started picking up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath narrative of innovation versus imitation. 2 months into the campaign, they were sitting in Preston's office reviewing the early response data when he suddenly said, "I'm glad you answered the door that night." Mara looked up from her laptop. "What? That first night, when I showed up at your apartment, I'm glad you answered. You would have just knocked again. Maybe." He was watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Or maybe I would have taken it as a sign to try a different approach, hire someone safer, more conventional, and lose the opportunity to have arguments about marketing philosophy at midnight." She kept her tone light, but something in the air between them had shifted, become charged. "Among other things." He didn't look away, and she found she couldn't either. Her phone rang, shattering the moment. It was one of the media contacts they'd been cultivating, wanting to schedule a feature interview with Preston. By the time she finished the call, he'd returned to work mode, professional and focused. But something had changed, and they both knew it. The awareness grew over the following weeks. She'd catch him watching her during meetings, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. He'd lean over her shoulder to look at something on her computer, and she'd be overwhelmingly aware of his presence, the warmth of him, the subtle scent of his cologne. They found excuses to work late together, ordering dinner and talking until the cleaning crew arrived and gave them pointed looks. Mara tried to tell herself it was just proximity, the natural result of spending 12 hours a day with someone. But she knew better. She was falling for Preston Gallagher, and it terrified her. This was supposed to be a job, a means to save her business. Getting emotionally involved with her client was every kind of stupid, especially when that client was a millionaire CEO with the power to destroy her career with a single phone call. 4 months into the contract, Preston invited her to a black tie fundraiser for a local children's hospital. It was, he explained, important for the company's public image that he attend with someone who understood the marketing narrative they were building. Entirely professional. Absolutely not a date. She bought a dress she couldn't afford, dark blue and simple but elegant, and spent an embarrassing amount of time on her hair and makeup. When Preston picked her up, he stood in her doorway for a full 5 seconds before speaking, his eyes traveling over her with unconcealed appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said finally, his voice rough. "You clean up pretty well yourself." It was an understatement. Preston in a tuxedo was devastating, all broad shoulders and classic elegance. The fundraiser was held at a downtown hotel, a glittering affair full of wealthy donors and local celebrities. Preston kept her close, his hand resting on the small of her back as they navigated the crowd. He introduced her to everyone they met, always with genuine warmth, always making it clear that she was important. She watched him charm donors and deflect subtle questions about his personal life, saw the way he lit up when talking about his company and the people who worked for him. During dinner, they were seated next to a couple who'd been married for 40 years and clearly adored each other. The wife asked how Preston and Mara had met, and there was a weighted pause before Preston said, "She saved my company." "He's exaggerating," Mara said quickly. "I just helped with a marketing campaign. You did a lot more than that." Preston was looking at her with an intensity that made her forget they were in a room full of people. "You reminded me why I started this in the first place." The wife smiled knowingly. "Oh, I like you too." After dinner, there was dancing. Preston held out his hand with a question in his eyes, and Mara took it without hesitation. On the dance floor, he pulled her close, one hand at her waist, the other cradling hers. They moved together easily, and she was reminded that he did everything with confidence, even this. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Thank you for inviting me, Mara." The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "This is going to sound insane, but I need to say it. These last 4 months, working with you, getting to know you, it's been the best part of my day. Every day. And I know that's complicated because you work for me, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable or abuse the power dynamic. But I also can't keep pretending that this is just professional, because it stopped being professional for me weeks ago." She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Preston, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Whatever you're feeling or not feeling, it doesn't change our working relationship. You're safe here, I promise. What if I said it's not just professional for me either?" The words came out barely above a whisper. He went very still, his eyes searching hers. "Is that what you're saying?" "I told you on the first night that this would end badly. I meant it. You're my client, you're wealthy and powerful, and I'm just someone trying to keep her head above water. This is a terrible idea, probably." His thumb traced small circles on her lower back, a touch that sent shivers through her. "But I've never been very good at playing it safe. I've noticed." "So what do we do?" Mara considered her options. She could pull back, maintain professional boundaries, finish out her contract and walk away with her business saved and her heart intact. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. Or she could lean into this terrifying, exhilarating feeling and see where it led, knowing it might end in disaster. "We finished the campaign," she said finally. "You're launching in 2 months and this is too important to get distracted, but after that..." She paused, gathering courage. "After that, we figure out what this is, together. You want to wait 2 months. I want to make sure we're doing this for the right reasons. Not just because we're working closely together, or because it's convenient, or because we're both running on adrenaline and caffeine. If this is real, it'll still be real in 2 months." Preston was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, 2 months, but Mara..." "Yeah, it's real for me, just so you know. The last 2 months of the campaign were simultaneously the best and most frustrating of Mara's life." She and Preston maintained professional boundaries at work, but the awareness simmered constantly beneath the surface. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every late-night conversation felt charged with possibility. The campaign itself exceeded all expectations. The product launch became a media sensation, with major business publications running features on Preston's company and the innovative manufacturing process. Orders poured in faster than production could handle. The competitor's knockoff product was dismissed as an obvious imitation, and their stock price took a hit when the extent of their corporate espionage came to light. Preston's company not only survived but thrived. Within 6 weeks of launch, he'd expanded production and hired 50 new employees. The board of directors issued a public statement praising his leadership and vision. And through it all, Mara worked beside him, watching him handle success with the same integrity he'd shown during the crisis. On the last day of her contract, Preston called her into his office. She went nervously, unsure what to expect. He stood when she entered, professional and composed, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "The contract is fulfilled," he said formally. "You delivered everything you promised and more. The board wanted me to pass along their gratitude." "It was my pleasure." She matched his formal tone, though her heart was racing. "I've arranged for a final payment, a bonus for exceeding expectations. It should be in your account by end of business today." "That wasn't necessary." "It was to me." He paused, then seemed to make a decision. "I also have something else for you." He handed her a folder. Inside was a contract, but not the kind she'd expected. It was a business proposal for her firm to become the exclusive marketing agency for Gallagher Industries, with a retainer that would guarantee her financial stability for years to come. "Preston, this is too much. It's good business. You're brilliant at what you do, and I need that expertise on an ongoing basis. This has nothing to do with anything personal." He said it firmly, but his eyes told a different story. "But if you're interested in exploring the personal side of things, I'm free for dinner tonight." "As a private citizen, not as your client." Mara looked at the contract, then at Preston, and felt something settle in her chest. "I'm free too." Their first official date was at a small Italian restaurant that Preston claimed made the best pasta in the state. He showed up at her door in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, and drove them across town while they argued playfully about music. At the restaurant, they sat in a corner booth and talked for 3 hours, conversation flowing easily now that the professional boundaries had dissolved. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Preston said over dessert. "Like what?" "Anything." "Something real," Mara considered. "I'm terrified of failure. Not the normal kind of fear, but the paralyzing kind. When my business started struggling, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I felt like I was drowning and I couldn't tell anyone because I was supposed to be the one with all the answers. That must have been lonely." "It was, until you showed up at my door with an impossible offer and ridiculous confidence." She smiled. "Your turn. Tell me something real." "I'm terrified of success." He said it quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "Every time the company grows, every time we hire more people, I think about how many lives are depending on me making the right decisions. What if I make a mistake? What if I become the kind of boss my father worked for?" "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you care enough to worry about it." The people who become those bosses are the ones who stop seeing employees as human beings. You've never done that. He reached across the table and took her hand. "You have a lot of faith in me. You've earned it." They dated slowly, carefully, learning each other outside the pressure of work. Preston introduced her to his mother, a warm woman who hugged Mara on sight and whispered that she'd never seen her son so happy. Mara introduced him to her small circle of friends, who interrogated him thoroughly and grudgingly admitted he seemed like a good guy. They went to movies and art galleries, took weekend trips to the mountains, cooked dinner together in Preston's massive kitchen. 6 months after their first date, Preston took her back to the place where it had all started, her tiny apartment where he'd first appeared with his impossible offer. She'd kept the lease even though she could afford better now, using it as office space for her rebuilt firm. "I remember standing in that hallway," Preston said, looking around the cramped space, "trying to figure out how to convince you to take a chance on me. You were very persuasive. I was desperate, and I was also, though I didn't realize it at the time, completely gone for you." He turned to face her. "You opened the door, and I saw you standing there in your coffee-stained sweatshirt, looking exhausted and defensive and absolutely beautiful, and something in my chest just shifted." "Preston." He pulled a small box from his pocket and her breath caught. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together 6 months, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build something real, something lasting, with the only person who's ever really understood me." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Mara Thompson, will you marry me?" She thought about that first night, about her prediction that this would end badly, about all the ways she'd been wrong. Yes, absolutely yes. The engagement was short because neither of them saw a point in waiting. They were married 4 months later in a small ceremony at Preston's house, surrounded by close friends and family. Her employees came, and so did his, and the celebration lasted well into the night. Preston's mother cried during the vows and told Mara afterward that she'd prayed for years that her son would find someone who could match his intensity and love him through it. Mara's best friend, who'd been skeptical of the whirlwind romance, admitted that she'd never seen Mara so happy. Married life suited them. They moved into Preston's house together, and Mara set up a home office in one of the spare rooms. Her firm continued to grow, taking on carefully selected clients while maintaining the exclusive contract with Gallagher Industries. Preston remained the intense, driven CEO she'd fallen for, but he'd learned to balance work with life, to take time for the things that mattered. A year into their marriage, Mara found out she was pregnant. They talked about kids abstractly, in the way of people who knew they wanted a family someday but hadn't settled on timing. The positive test sent them both into a spiral of excitement and terror. "What if I'm terrible at this?" Preston asked the night they found out, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You won't be." "How do you know?" "Because you'll care enough to worry about it, just like with everything else." Their daughter was born on a sunny morning in May, small and perfect and utterly terrifying. They named her Claire, and Preston cried when he held her for the first time. This strong, confident man reduced to awed silence by 8 pounds of tiny human. Fatherhood transformed him in subtle ways. He still worked hard, still drove himself and his company toward excellence, but he also left the office at reasonable hours. He learned to change diapers and soothe colicky crying at 2 in the morning. He built elaborate blanket forts in the living room and read the same bedtime stories over and over with unfailing patience. Mara watched him with their daughter and fell in love with him all over again, this new dimension of the man she'd married. She balanced her own work with motherhood, grateful for the financial security that allowed her to take maternity leave without panic, to hire help when she needed it, to build her business at a sustainable pace. Claire was 2 when they decided to expand their family. The second pregnancy was harder, and their son arrived 3 weeks early, sending them both into a panic. But Marcus was healthy and strong, with his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Life settled into a beautiful, chaotic rhythm. The house that had once been Preston's bachelor space transformed into a home filled with toys and laughter, and the organized chaos of two small children. Gallagher Industries continued to thrive, and Mara's firm became one of the most respected marketing agencies in the region. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston took Mara back to the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. They left the kids with Preston's mother and spent the evening just being a couple, not parents or business owners or any of the other roles they'd accumulated. "Do you remember what you said that first night?" Preston asked over wine. "When I showed up at your door, I said you were insane. Before that, you said this would end badly," Mara laughed. "I was wrong about a lot of things that night. You were right too, though. It did end badly." "What are you talking about? This is perfect." "Exactly. The old version ended badly. The struggling entrepreneur, the desperate CEO, the impossible deadline, all of that ended, and it ended badly for those versions of us. But what came after?" He reached across the table for her hand. "What came after is better than anything I could have imagined that night." She squeezed his fingers, understanding what he meant. "Then let's make sure this version never ends. Deal?" They went home to their children and their beautiful house, to the life they'd built together from that first impossible meeting. And if sometimes Mara thought about the coffee-stained sweatshirt and the tiny apartment and the desperate fear that had defined her before Preston, she thought about it with gratitude. Because that version of herself had been brave enough to open the door, to take a chance on an impossible offer from a stranger. Years passed in the way they do for happy families, measured not in grand events but in small moments. First days of school and lost teeth, family vacations and holiday traditions, the steady accumulation of shared history. Preston's company expanded internationally, and Mara's firm opened offices in 3 states. They weathered challenges together: a recession that tested the business, Preston's mother's health scare, the normal struggles of raising children and maintaining a marriage amid busy lives. When Claire turned 12, she asked her parents how they'd met. They were sitting around the dinner table, a rare evening when everyone was home at the same time, and the question caught both Mara and Preston off guard. "Your father showed up at my door with a crazy business proposal," Mara said, exchanging a glance with Preston. "Mom almost didn't let me in," Preston added, his eyes warm with memory. "She thought I was insane." "You were insane. Who offers that kind of money to a stranger? Someone desperate enough to recognize genius when he sees it." Claire rolled her eyes in the way of pre-teens everywhere. "You two are so weird." Marcus, now 10 and obsessed with superheroes, leaned forward. "Was it like love at first sight?" "Not exactly," Preston said thoughtfully. "It was more like recognition. I saw your mother and something in me knew she was going to be important. I didn't know how yet, but I knew." "What about you, Mom?" Claire asked. Mara considered. "I thought your father was trouble, too handsome, too confident, too everything. But I also thought he was worth the risk, and I was right." That night, after the kids were in bed, Preston found Mara in her office, reviewing contracts for a new client. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work with the same intensity she brought to everything. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't answered the door that night?" he asked. She looked up, surprised. "Sometimes. I think I would have lost my business. Probably would have moved back to my hometown, gotten a job with a bigger firm, been fine but not happy. I think I would have found someone else to do the campaign. It would have been good but not great. The company would have survived, but I would have stayed closed off, focused only on work. I'd have missed all of this. Guess we got lucky." "No." He crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "Luck implies chance. We made choices, both of us. You chose to be brave. I chose to be honest. We chose each other every day, even when it was hard. Are you getting philosophical on me, Gallagher? Maybe. It's our anniversary next week. I'm allowed to be sentimental. Their 15th anniversary was celebrated with a renewal of vows, surrounded by the children who were growing too fast, the friends who'd supported them, the employees who'd become family. Preston spoke his vows with tears in his eyes, promising again to honor and cherish the woman who'd saved his company and captured his heart. Mara promised to continue the journey, wherever it led, knowing that with Preston beside her, she could handle anything. The business landscape continued to evolve. Preston eventually stepped back from day-to-day operations at Gallagher Industries, appointing a new CEO while remaining chairman of the board. He used his experience and resources to mentor young entrepreneurs, helping others avoid the pitfalls he'd faced. Mara's firm became known for its ethical practices and innovative campaigns, and she found deep satisfaction in building up other women in business. Claire grew into a thoughtful young woman interested in engineering, spending her summers interning at her father's company and asking pointed questions about sustainable manufacturing. Marcus discovered a passion for storytelling, writing elaborate adventure tales and filming them with his friends. Both children grew up watching their parents navigate a true partnership, seeing what it looked like when two people respected and supported each other equally. On their 25th anniversary, Preston surprised Mara with a trip back to the city where it had all started. Her old apartment building was gone, replaced by a modern development, but they stood on the spot where Preston had first knocked on her door. 25 years, Mara said, leaning into Preston's side. We've done okay. Better than okay. His arm tightened around her. You know what I think about sometimes? That version of me who drove across town to find you. How scared he was that you'd say no. How certain he was that you were the answer to everything, even though he couldn't have explained why. What would you tell him if you could? I'd tell him to trust himself. That taking risks with the right person isn't reckless. It's the smartest thing he'll ever do. That the journey will be even better than he imagines. Preston turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with familiar tenderness. And I'd tell him that she's going to say something about it ending badly, and he should listen. Because it will end badly for the old version. But what rises from those ashes will be extraordinary. Mara kissed him there on the sidewalk, 25 years and a lifetime away from that first impossible meeting. Around them, the city continued its busy rhythm, people rushing past with their own stories and struggles and moments of transformation. They drove home to their family, to the house that had become a home, to the life they'd built together. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Claire had married young and given them 2 beautiful grandchildren. They celebrated not just an anniversary, but a testament to what could happen when 2 people chose each other despite the odds. Tell us again how you met, their eldest grandchild asked, a 6-year-old with Preston's green eyes and Mara's stubborn chin. Preston and Mara exchanged the look of a couple who'd told this story 100 times and would happily tell it 100 more. Your grandmother opened a door, Preston began, and your grandfather made an impossible offer, Mara continued, and they lived happily ever after, the child asked hopefully. Something like that, Mara agreed, taking Preston's hand. Something exactly like that. In the end, Mara's prediction had been both wrong and right. It had ended badly for the struggling entrepreneur and the desperate CEO. Those versions of themselves had been transformed by crisis and choice into something stronger, more complete. But the love they'd built, the family they'd created, the life they'd shared that hadn't ended at all. It had just kept growing, deepening, becoming richer with each passing year. Preston Gallagher had appeared at her door with an impossible offer on a Tuesday night 25 years ago, and Thompson had been brave enough to say yes. And in saying yes to that first risk, she'd said yes to everything that followed: the love and the challenge, the joy and the struggle, the beautiful, complicated journey of building a life with someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. It was, she thought as she watched Preston play with their grandchildren, the best risk she'd ever taken. The kind of risk that transformed everything. The kind that made every moment of the journey worth it, just as Preston had promised on that first impossible night. And if sometimes she thought about the woman she'd been before, exhausted and afraid and drowning in debt, she thought about her with compassion and gratitude. Because that woman had been strong enough to survive, brave enough to hope, and wise enough to recognize that sometimes the most terrifying possibilities are also the most beautiful. Their story became the kind families tell and retell, polished smooth by repetition, but never losing its essential truth. It was a story about risk and reward, about the courage to trust someone when logic said you shouldn't, about the way two people can save each other without either one giving up who they are. Preston and Mara lived long lives filled with love and purpose. They watched their children build their own families, their company continue to thrive under new leadership, their impact ripple outward in ways they'd never anticipated. And through it all, they held fast to each other, two people who'd taken an impossible chance and made it work through sheer determination and love. On their 50th anniversary, too old to do much celebrating but too stubborn to let the day pass unmarked, they sat together on the porch of their home and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. No regrets. Preston asked, his hand finding hers with the ease of 5 decades of practice. Not a single one, Mara replied, squeezing his fingers. You, just one. She turned to look at him, surprised. I should have kissed you that first night, he said with a grin. Would have saved us a lot of time. Mara laughed, the sound clear and joyful. You were already pushing your luck, Gallagher. I probably would have slammed the door in your face. Probably, he agreed, but it would have been worth it. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who'd bet everything on each other and won. And if Mara's first prediction had been wrong, her second one the unspoken promise they'd made to each other that this version would never end had been absolutely right. Because love like theirs didn't end. It just transformed, deepened, became woven so thoroughly into the fabric of their lives that it was impossible to imagine existence without it. The Millionaire had said to make the journey worth it, and they had. Every single day, in ways large and small, they'd made it worth it. And that, in the end, was the truest form of happily ever after.